came back to the island, my brother Leslie and I, in the spring of '96 to revisit old haunts that were once familiar. We were both born in Stornoway, and although we've been back many times over the years on family holidays, this time it's a bit different. No family left on the island now, so we've come back as tourists on a holiday tinged with memories. We spent our childhood here, and now, after nearly 3/4 of a century, here we are, two old bothers driving back into the past. Over the years, Stornoway has seen quite a few changes. Miller's Garage isn't anymore. This was where our father, together with his father, set up one of the first motor car dealerships on the island, while his brother Albert made a name for himself as an early inventor of the automatic gearbox. Further along Cromwell Street, Capaldi's Rendezvous Cafe is gone, so's Lipton's Grocery. Peter Squeeg's, the Candos, all gone. But we have traffic lights now. Percival Square is still the popular meeting place it always was with the young and hopeful. So much is gone, and yet so much remains the same. This was our first family home. There was no tiled cottages then, no central heating or double glazing. With a big open fireplace in the living room, they were very cosy homes indeed. I can remember Colin Soda's Model T Ford spitting and snorting its way up this hill. My, how times have changed. My father came home to Stornoway at the end of World War I after soldiering in France. He was lucky. He survived the war, and he didn't come home on the Isle Air. Packed with homecoming ex-servicemen on New Year's Eve 1918, she foundered on the beasts of Holland and sank within sight of the helpless relatives waiting for their menfolk to come home. There's not a village on the island that was not touched by the tragic loss of lives. The other event that was to affect the whole island at this time was the arrival of Lord Leverhulme. William Hesketh Lever, the Lancashire soap king, co-founder of Lever Brothers, had just bought the whole of Lewis and Harris from the son of the previous owner, Sir James Matheson. Sir James, a partner in the firm of Jardine Matheson, had made his fortune from the opium trade with China. Soap or heroin, they were both just marketable commodities. But what's happened to Sir James's memorial? It used to be surmounted by a beautiful marble angel, whom in my childish ignorance I thought was Lady Matheson. Whoever she was, she's gone now. Perhaps it's just as well, as it's hardly a proper setting for an angel. Leverhulme took up residence in Lewis Castle, the Victorian pile that had been built by Sir James to keep up with the Joneses. Tobacco lords and shipping magnates of the time were outdoing each other in the size of their houses. So why shouldn't an opium king be upsides with them? When Leverhulme bought the island, an extra bonus came with the acquisition of the whaling station in West Loch Tarbert. In those days, whale oil was used in the manufacture of soap. But nowadays, the slaughter of whales is no longer politically correct, and all that's left of the whaling station is a memorial chimney. Our mother's father was a master glazier, and he had been brought to Lewis by Leverhulme to build him a wee conservatory next to the castle. He brought his daughter up to join him, she met my father, and they were married in 1922. So if it wasn't for Leverhulme, they might never have met, and Leslie and I would never have been born. It's a funny old world. Leverhulme in the meantime was not faring so well. All his great plans for the improvement of the island were crumbling around him. He had great ideas, but he was out of touch with the people. They were not prepared to give up the freedom of the croft and the sea to work in a factory and live in a tied house for an overlord, however good his intentions. On September 25th, 1924, he carried out his last public duty on the island, the unveiling of the war memorial, and left the island that same day for the very last time, a bitterly disappointed man. This elegant bridge over the River Garry is his only epitaph. built to carry the new road linking up the northern circuit of the island, it stands alone in splendid isolation. The road was never built. I came into this world in April 1925, and 2 weeks later Lord Leverhulme left it. The 20s and 30s were stirring times in the islands. Aeroplanes began to appear, and the first landings were by seaplanes in the harbour. This was all very exciting for us islanders, who had never seen anything quite like it before. But like every new venture, it had its downs as well as its ups. Soon planes were landing in the field at Melbourne, and if early refuelling was a bit primitive, these early pioneers paved the way for regular air services to the islands. A proper aerodrome was established at Melbourne, and the de Havilland Rapide became the backbone of Scottish Airways and led to the setting up of the first air ambulance service. This was South Beach Street as I knew it in my school days. It hasn't changed much. Still dominated by the town hall, but Burton's is no longer there, and the old girls' hostel building is gone. But look, another set of traffic lights. The old picture house building is still there, but it doesn't show pictures anymore. Happy memories of Saturday matinees, and in later years taking a girl to the 1 and 9s with a bag of boilings from Maggie Jean's sweetie shop. There's sophistication. Down there were the kipper sheds where we supplemented our pocket money by making kipper boxes. School days started here in Miss Reed's wee school. This was our entry to the Nicholson Institute and the Learning Curve. That's me, age 6, peering nervously out of Miss Bell Morrison's class. The Nicholson was a good school. Oh, it had its share of eccentrics among the staff, but doesn't every school? But the teaching standards were high in those days. With no calculators or computers to help us, we had to learn the hard way. But why was Scottish history totally ignored? I learned more about Scottish history from Mel Gibson than I ever learned in school. One thing that surprised me looking at the Springfield Road building today, were the doors really as small as that? Lady Lever Park, or the castle grounds as we knew it, stretched from the Porter's Lodge in the edge of town to the mouth of the River Creed and the mysterious Macanthrolly's Cave. A wonderful playground for us kids to play out our fantasy adventures, imaginations fueled by our Saturday matinee heroes, and a source of further education too. The grounds were very popular with courting couples, and this provided extra points to the learning curve not covered by the school curriculum. I remember once being perched precariously in the upper branches of a tree, being Robin Hood in Sherwood Forest, and a couple appeared and threw their blanket on the ground. Things were just getting interesting when the lady suddenly noticed that they had an audience. They took up their blanket and ran. I don't know who was more embarrassed, the lady or me. Motoring across the moors of Lewis and Harris today doesn't produce many surprises. Not a lot has changed over the years, although a 40 sign in the middle of Ballallam was a bit unexpected. So was this eye-catching garden ornament in Laxey. Couldn't be Lady Matheson, could it? No. And how about this for a scarecrow? I don't know how the crows feel, but on a dark and windy night, it could give anybody a bad turn. There is one major improvement across the face of the island, and we're driving on it. Today's smooth highways are a vast improvement on the old single-track narrow ways with passing places. Oh dear, I spoke too soon. Look at those skid marks. Somebody got caught short. But why did they leave this in the middle of the main road joining Lewis and Harris? Harris is quite different to Lewis. Where Lewis is relatively flat and featureless, Harris is rocky and mountainous. That's the Clishan there, the highest mountain on the island, and I think the first my brother ever climbed. Since then he has climbed just about every other mountain in the country. Here's a thing about mountains. Me, I'm happier at sea level. This is the Bays Road on Harris's east coast, winding through the site of the controversial super quarry at Linger Bay. Up on the left are the rocky slopes of Runaval, which, if the quarry comes to pass, will probably one day disappear. Whether this will be an improvement or a desecration, I suppose depends on whether you have to live with it or not. While the east coast of Harris looks like a moonscape, the other side, the west coast, boasts some of the finest beaches to be found anywhere. And yet, surprisingly, they're usually totally deserted. But not always. Look, there's a crowded beach. And there's another one. Visitors to Lewis and Harris today have a choice of two sea routes, the direct sailing from Ullapool and Wester Ross to Stornoway, or the shorter crossing from Skye to Tarbert Harris. Pity the poor foreign tourist who drives off the Tarbert ferry today with his Reader's Digest road map in his lap. He won't find any of these names on it. The local Gaelic speakers don't need a signpost, they know which way to turn. Still, I suppose if I went to Greece, all their signs would be Greek to me. My first crossing of the Minch back in the 20s was on the Sheila, the little steamer that sailed between Stornoway, Kelloch and Mallik. Not exactly built for comfort, she was soon replaced by the Loch Ness, which is our main link with the mainland right through the 30s, opening up an exciting world of trains, trams and double-decker buses. The route through Mallik served us well. The train from Glasgow brought you right out onto the pierhead. A few steps to the gangway led you down to your stateroom, and an elegant silver service dining room. Of course, with no stabilisers and an almost flat bottom, she rolled like a barrel. Cafeteria-style nosh and coloured plastic tables are a far cry from the quietly elegant dining saloons of the old mailboats. But once ashore, food was a different kettle of fish. We stayed here at the Tower Guest House, once an earlier Provost's townhouse, and we were treated and fed like royalty. We found another wonderful restaurant at the end of the universe over on the west coast, at the far end of this tract to Dalbeck. Fresh salmon from Loch Rogue, real Lewis mutton and all local produce, served in a setting that is almost out of this world. One cannot visit Lewis and Harris without paying one's respects to the island's #1 tourist attraction, the Callanish Stones. These megalithic rocks are the earliest visible sign of human habitation in the islands. As old as Stonehenge, they were planted here over 4,000 years ago. That makes them as old as the earliest recorded biblical times, the time of the patriarchs of Abraham and Isaac. But what kind of people put them there? Little is known about them, but there must have been a lot of them. Took a fair amount of manpower to plant that lot. The next sign of man's presence didn't appear for another 2,000 years. This fortified Pictish dwelling at Doon Carloway was built about the time of the Roman invasion of Britain, and that was 55 years even before the dawn of Christianity. But why did these early Picts need fortified dwellings? Who were they afraid of? The Romans certainly never got this far, so it could only have been against their hostile neighbours, plundering tribes from Shawbust and Braga perhaps. But Shawbust wasn't called that then. It wasn't until the Vikings arrived several centuries later that many of the island villages received their Norse names. All the Bosts, Shawbust, Leobust, Harbust and the rest. And names like Lemmerway and Stornoway are also Norse. In fact, if you look at Stornoway in its Gaelic spelling, Stornoway, it wouldn't look out of place up in the Norwegian fjord. The Vikings had a fearsome reputation for rape and pillage. Was it really deserved? You'd hardly go charging ashore bent on rape and pillage with a pocket full of chess pieces, would you? These are the sand dunes at Ardroyle, where the Lewis chessmen were found buried in the sand by a passing crofter taking his cow home. Maybe that chess-playing Viking dropped his chessmen while returning to his longship after a quiet game ashore with the lads. Who knows? But Vikings or no, one thing is sure. These magnificent west coast beaches were absolute heaven for us kids. We built sand castles with our buckets and spades in these same sand dunes, but we never found any treasure. To feel the rush of wet sand being sucked from under your feet, to plunge recklessly into sometimes 10-foot high breakers rolling in from the Atlantic was fun. We never thought about danger, but danger there was. Fierce undertow and strong currents scoured this coast. Today there's a notice here at Dalmore warning that swimming in this bay is dangerous. And yet when we were young we knew nothing of this and were perfectly happy frolicking in the waves while our parents picnicked on the Macher. The world was much less safety conscious in those days than it is now. But inevitably there were tragic accidents. I knew one young girl, still only a child, who was drowned in these treacherous waters. And she was only one of several similar tragedies. But if the sea was a dangerous playground, the calmer waters of Stornoway Harbour were perfect for messing about in boats. Today the inner harbour is quiet and peaceful. Not a lot of activity going on. A few isolated workers here and there doing the sort of things that always seem to need doing in and around boats. Back in the old days, the inner harbour would be packed with drifters unloading cram after cram of herring and whitefish onto the quayside. My mother used to say you couldn't buy a decent fish in Stornoway. All the best of them were sent away to the mainland markets. But for us urchins on the quayside, there were plenty of pickings to be had off the boats. We didn't take them home, oh dear me no. A score of skeds were soon converted into the hard currency of mead, sweens and tanners. We played pirates and smugglers among the wrecks of derelict drifters, and crawled fearlessly among the slippery piles under the piers, fishing for cuddies. And we could always borrow a leaky old dinghy to paddle around the harbour, or row out to Borachora to swim off the rocks. But the ultimate joy was to borrow a duchy. When a Scandinavian Klondiker dropped anchor in the harbour, the crew would come ashore in beautiful varnished dories, and as soon as they had disappeared into Max Imperium or the Star Inn, we knew we were safe until closing time. We sailed these little boats all over the harbour, and almost by default learned quite a lot about handling small boats. That was when I made my mind up that one day I'd have a boat of my own. But World War II was still waiting for me when I finally left childhood behind and went into the Royal Navy to become just another Lewisman sailing the seven seas. Some years after the end of the war, I did eventually acquire a boat of my own. It wasn't quite as grand as the Malcolm Miller, but since then I've never been without a boat of one kind or another. The Leslie's love of mountains has never left him. I've had a love-hate relationship with the sea. I've been both exhilarated by it and at times terrified out of my wits. But it's always there, and it always beckons.